yeah, the reality was that people hated it. They absolutely hated it because they felt a bit disrespected. A little mistake that I am seeing here and there is that you try to solve the wrong problem with AI.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you for coming on our podcast. Patricia is an experienced AI and UX consultant. And I have a really hot question for you. This is coming from everywhere, also to us and to our teammates. A company, where should it put AI in the product or in the software?
I think that's a wonderful question, and this is what probably every team or company is asking themselves about. I think the first big question that you need to tackle is what is the actual problem that you want to solve, right? Because a little mistake that I am seeing here and there is that you try to solve the wrong problem with AI. I mean, the problem is not wrong, but you solve a problem with AI where AI is not a good fit. So I would say as a very first step, you think about like, what is the problem that you would like to solve with AI? And there are some specific problems where you need more empathy, where you need more like human contact, what Caleb just talked about, where AI is probably not the best fit. AI is good at analyzing huge amounts of data, synthesizing, summarizing, giving recommendations, right? So first of all, find the right problem that you could solve, and then think about how can AI help solve this problem. And then in the second step, I always think, what is the AI pattern basically for a potential product? So this could be an advisor. An advisor is something like Grammarly, for example. Grammarly is, if you write a text and there's a spelling mistake, Grammarly underlines the spelling mistakes and then recommends another or a different spelling.
With suggestions and stuff.
Exactly. So this is like a suggestion or like a recommendation what the user could do. This is just like a very tiny detail in a product that helps the user. If the user accepts the edit, it gets integrated in the product. If the user rejects it, it gets removed, right? So maybe the spelling mistake was on purpose. So this is one idea to integrate AI. This is very, like, I would say, if you think of like, what's the trust or how important the UX is for these kind of solutions, it would be the UX needs to be skimmable, right? So when you integrate these AI patterns and advisor, you need to think of like the user needs to understand, there's a spelling mistake, I need to accept or reject it. So this is like a very easy integration for AI. What could potentially go wrong? I mean, it would be annoying if it's not correct, but it's also not super difficult. Another pattern could also be the generator. And this is what we use most of the time. This also goes into the direction of the co-pilot or the chatbot. So the user enters a prompt, a very specific task. It's proactive. For example, summarize the stock, and then the AI creates an output. And this output can be hopefully, or it needs to be editable, right? Because they're working with hallucinations, with biases. So we can't, it's very difficult to say that the result is always correct. This probably won't happen, right? So we need to make sure that it's editable. So when we think a bit further, we could also design an agent. So an agent would be basically a system that acts autonomously, has access to different tools, and can solve much more complex problems. For example, the agent in ChatGPT, for example, you say, I want to book a trip to London, and then it has access to different tools, for example, search, maybe your calendar, maybe also a connection MCP to booking.com. And then in the next step, it books it gives you a recommendation, and then the user can book something. What's very important, like from a UX perspective there, is that you need to approve it, right? So that it's not booking autonomously a trip that you don't want. So the approval process from a UX perspective is super important. And then at the end of this line is the orchestrator, where you have different agents working together, but you don't have this approval process with every agent. So there it gets very complex, very difficult. And there it's super important that, like, from your UX perspective, the user really understands like what is going on in the background, not what agent is working on what, but what are the results, so that I can basically backtrack what happened and then understand the result, right? So to summarize a little bit, first of all, think of what is the problem that I actually want to solve? Is this the right problem? And then think of how could I actually help solving this problem? Think if like what kind of pattern do I choose? Is this an advisor? Is this a generator? Is this an agent? Is this an orchestrator? Actually, a couple of more, but just to keep it a bit simpler. And with I would say, like, from the advisor to the orchestrator, trust becomes more important. The system gets more autonomy, which makes it also much more difficult to design. You need guardrails, right? You need approval lines. You need human approvals in the process. You need to do a lot of user testing as well. And then, as the last step, you can build a prototype. You can test this with users and see if this is the right problem that you focused on, or if there's something to improve, maybe.
I have a follow-up question on this. Should a company build on existing features and integrate AI? Or, in your experience, you have better results if you, let's say, build a new experience from scratch, AI-based? Like, is it easy to force and put AI into, let's say, software or enterprise products already working well without? Or is it better to have different products that are native, AI native?
This is a wonderful question, honestly. And so, from my experience, a lot of companies are saying that if they could start new, also like notions, like they would say, I would start to build an AI product, completely AI focused. But most of the times, this is very difficult. This is very difficult to start from scratch. I think this is the way what you should do. Rebuild basically everything, start from scratch, use an AI first product. But this is unfortunately not the reality what companies are dealing with, right? Because they already have their user base in the product. They have an amazing, like a huge infrastructure, like information architecture, all the data in the background, that you can't just like rebuild everything from scratch. So it's a bit difficult. So I would say we're in this stage in between where we start to experiment with AI, where we see what's working, also what our users really want. And we are integrating AI features, hopefully, to solve problems that really bring value to the user. And then in the next step, I don't see this right now, but probably like at some point, I see pretty much every product being rebuilt into an AI first product, or competitors building AI first products, and then the market will shift a little bit, right? So I think this was an amazing question, because you think like, where do I actually start? And building a completely new product is very difficult. Especially if you have not a lot of experience, if you're just starting out. So you need experts who consult you, who help you, who guide you on the way. You need to have your learnings with your users. So like starting from scratch, if you are new with AI, I think I would not really recommend it. Start slow and see what's working, what not. And then at some point, if you're ready, think about like rebuilding parts or the whole product.
Yeah, thank you for this point. Last question. I was thinking about what you just said. In the coming years, product will be rebuilt and will become more AI native. And if we think about what happened with blockchain a few years ago, there was a big misconception of trend versus technology. So a lot of companies wanted to use blockchain for the trend, not for the technology. Do you think there's a risk that company want to use AI for the same reason, like more for the trend, not for the technology? Because maybe the risk is everything will become an LLM, everything will be a chat, and is it good for the user or not? Is this a risk in your vision?
Yeah, I think this is super interesting, right? When we're thinking back of blockchain, this was like a perfect example of like squeezing a technology into a problem. I didn't really need a blockchain most of the times. I mean, the idea of the blockchain is that things are decentralized. They are in a safe environment. Basically, they don't have this like central environment. But do you really need this for for your product? Most of the times you don't, right? I mean, security is super important, but is this solving a problem? Most of the times it didn't. And I think this is the big problem. Users will love things that makes their life easier, that helps them, that remove the tedious tasks, that helps them feel safe and secure, and remove the tasks they don't want to. I think from my experience. And with AI, I'm definitely seeing that. If you use it correctly, there are a lot of ways of, or how AI is really helping the user to get to their goals faster. So I think it's a little bit different with blockchain. The advantages were not there for the user. It was a huge hype and people started to integrate it. Blockchain still is a great technology, but not for every problem, right? So I think this is a very, very important reminder. Think about the problem that you're solving. Is this a problem at all? Right? You need to understand. Then is this a problem where I can actually help? Is this something where AI is great? So just 3 weeks ago or so, I was working with a client who built an AI chatbot, pretty much like a co-pilot to help with questions inside their organization. So usually they had dedicated people in the organization who could answer questions for social media posts, basically anything you can think of. There were so many questions that I thought, this would actually be a wonderful thing to automate. Right? Because they were always the same questions. So they automated it. They put an AI bot behind it, like an agent who automatically answered all the questions. You would think, wonderful, people will love it. Yeah, the reality was that people hated it. They absolutely hated it because they felt a bit disrespected. They're taking their time to answer or to ask a question, and then they get a nice answer, but this was from a bot. So they felt really disrespected from the company, and then the whole chatbot was closed and they got back to normal. And I think this is a good example of you have a problem, you have a lot of user requests, a lot of questions that probably take a long time to answer. But is integrating a bot the right way? Or, for example, in this case, could there be a way of I have a quick question. I don't really mind if this is a bot. I know that I'm chatting with a bot, customer service, for example, or I want a personal response. So I'm using the email, right? So differentiating. And I think it is super important to find the right problem, how you can actually solve it. And then very, very important is also do user testing. See what users like and then use the feedback, right? Test it with a small group of people, see how the feedback is, and then improve or iterate. And then you will find out if AI is the right solution eventually. Yeah, it's definitely a work in progress and a lot of things that everyone needs to learn.
So key takeaway, always start from the problem and the user at the end of the story.
And this is not new. This is typical UX work.
Yeah.
I mean, this is product work. This is not only UX. This is understand your problem. And it sounds super easy, right? This is common sense. Of course, you're starting with the problem. But the reality is sometimes you get so excited with the opportunities and with the possibilities that you think, okay, great, this excitement of, wow, we can automate that. This is so cool. Let's try it out. But then you aren't really solving the problem. So it's just a very tricky, difficult situation to find the right problem because there are a ton. And then think of is AI the right way or the right technology? So maybe it is blockchain. You don't know. You don't know what it is, right? You always need to think about this.
Yeah.
And of course, do testing. Use the learnings.
Thank you very much, Patricia. It was a pleasure to have you here on the podcast. And thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun talking to you.
We also have the clap.
Perfect.